Welcome, everybody, to This Week in Games from Deconstructor of Fun. TWIG 317. The inmates are now running the asylum with Miss Jen out of the picture. I think this is the first time in like years. I don't know. She's been very consistent. So it's just me, Philip Black, and Adam Telfer giving you guys an update on what's happening in the news. What we're going to talk about is the Dream Games Big Check, Battlefield Reimagined, Reemerging, and the biggest Roblox M&A deal ever. So, who do we have today?
Phil Black, monetization star.
Adam, product guy. Let's just get into it. Let's get it.
Boys Club. Yeah. Wait, hold on. I think there is one thing we have to revisit now that we've all had different moments to go after Matthew Ball. But I couldn't realize how much resentment there is out there. There's like an anti-Matthew Ball crowd that feels like they're not being spoken to. And ever since anyone's spoken out, they're like, oh, Eric. Thank God Eric spoke out, by the way.
Well, I think there's both sides of the camp because everyone still wants to believe in the metaverse type thing. But I think the majority of people are like, oh my God, yeah, that guy's so full of shit. Like that's a constant. Of course, I'm in my own echo chamber, I imagine. But I think so far, like, I think people kind of want to call him out for completely fucking up the entire thing, and just destroying it. Except for Heatherly, right? Heatherly still is holding on for dear life for the hope and dream that is Web3, like rainbows and unicorns will come to real life. It's like unbelievable. Like that guy, he's in his own world.
Didn't Beamable like just raise around right now? Around metaverse platform stuff? Beamable.
The again, Star Trek timelines people from Massachusetts?
Yeah, that they basically shifted to metaverse technology, metaverse platform stuff. Where is the anti-ball crowd coming from? Is it all the people just saying like, hey, anti-metaverse, this doesn't make sense. Why did you talk about it? Or what is the anti-ball crowd saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. His vision for the metaverse was ridiculous, basically. I mean, I heard that from many people back then. It wasn't like some like revelation now. I mean, I was on a podcast like 2 years ago ad nauseum talking about how this vision of the metaverse is ridiculous. Like, yeah, Roblox is a metaverse, and so is Epic's thing, World of Warcraft. All these things are different, like niche metaverses. That is what the metaverse is. It's not some ubiquitous, like the next internet thing, and that was the whole pitch. But some people like Heatherly are getting very confused about what's real and what's not.
I remember fighting in the trenches with you, Eric, right? Like talking to people who just wanted to shift all strategy towards the metaverse and how infuriating those conversations would be around false equivalency after false equivalency. No, I'm just asking the question of like, is it just about the metaverse or is there actual like good pointed feedback back to him about some of the analysis that he did around the future of the market?
I think it's really about the suggestions he offers to the future. Like, I think everyone like spit up their coffee when he said AAA mobile gaming.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
What? Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think, when he goes over the growth drivers for the future, they're potential growth drivers. I don't think he's advocating for all of them, but it feels like he is a little bit by putting them out there. I would say that's one of them. I mean, other new handled devices, we're talking about like the PlayStation Portal, the Steam device. I mean, in the report, he goes over how many few units that they've sold. Again, I don't think you have to hold him to this as being his argument. I think he's just pointing out like these are potential things we should examine, but ultimately they don't really go anywhere. I think the most disappointing part is he didn't reflect on his metaverse. He didn't update what went wrong or what went right. And I think that's the frustration is like there's rich analysis to be done there, Mr. Ball. Like we'd love to see you do it. It's not a walk of shame. At least I tried to do something on Squad Busters after it was released, but it's like update your priors. What'd you learn? How did we grow from this? It looks like it's not panning out. Give us something to chew on.
Yeah, right. But I think that is good feedback to him, right? It's just to say, like, let's talk about the metaverse because he does do a whole section on Roblox. You could have used that section to talk more about what has he learned since writing his book and how does that apply towards his vision of the future.
Right, and the success of Roblox and fledgling success of Epic's platform, like there's new things going on, right? You could just update it with the actual what's happening on the field, right? But you just can't just leave this just hanging out there, like, dude, you wrote a whole book about it and did a tour. It's like, what? Okay. Anyway. All right. I guess I'm leading this charge, which is really uncomfortable, but okay. Corrections. In the last episode, Miska said that outsourcing companies, especially Keywords and Ventures, he said that Virtuous has 1,200 employees. That's only in the West. Virtuous has over 4,200 employees worldwide. Thank you, the Virtuos player folks, for reaching out on this. Adam?
We launched the PvE Shooter podcast. So actually, the weird thing is we recorded that, I think like a couple days after Marvel Rivals came out, right? So it's actually been quite a bit of time since we recorded it, but we've been getting good feedback on it. One was around that we made the wrong assumption that Division 3 had not been announced when it has been. There actually is open roles open for the game. We'll see how that all nets out. And also, we didn't talk about Borderlands 4, which was a big miss. Eric is pissed about Borderlands. Really?
Borderlands?
No, you're not.
All right. Quickly on the headlines. Yeah, we don't have any banter, or we're not shilling. Okay. Oh, because Miska's not here.
That makes this so much faster.
Dunk on him while he's down.
That's right. We can get right into it, right? By the way, there is a shit ton of things going on at GDC. So please keep an eye out for things that are coming for that. I think that's going to be really a great event. I'm hoping actually that we'll see a lot more activity. There's some people think that the last great GDC was last year, but I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more activity at GDC with new shit going on.
Game devs. We know that great gameplay is what players love, but integrating metagame features like challenges, progression, rewards is crucial for retention and monetization. However, coding them is a tedious and time-consuming process. That's why top studios have turned to Hero. Hero provides a complete suite of battle-tested metagame features that are quick to implement, letting you spend more time on the core gameplay experience. Ready to ship fully featured, engaging games? Check out Hero today by clicking the link below.
Attention app and game developers. Are you ready to unlock the secrets behind the world's top performing apps and games? With Sensor Tower, you get the ultimate competitive edge, whether it's breaking into new markets, fine-tuning your UA strategies, or boosting monetization. Dive into data like never before, track global trends across app stores, analyze market-leading in-app purchase and in-app ad strategies, and benchmark your performance with real-time insight. The best part, Sensor Tower doesn't just deliver data, it helps you turn it into action. With intuitive tools and expert analysis, it's everything you need to make smarter, faster decisions. Thousands of app and game studios, from indie creators to global giants, trust Sensor Tower to help them win. So why not you? Start your free trial today at sensortower.com. That is sensortower.com.
Headlines. Dragon Age team is no more. So this is actually relatively sad. I mean, these guys have been hanging on for dear life for over a decade, it seems. But I think after this disastrous launch of Dragon Age, in which they basically said the customer just wasn't all that interested in what they were doing, it looks like they've kind of like cut half the team and moved most of the other people over to Mass Effect. So Mass Effect is basically the last ditch effort to save BioWare as a development team, it seems, anyway. So Mass Effect hasn't been in development. Hopefully they don't try to reinvent the wheel and just do what makes Mass Effect great, because I think that's still a good entry for the industry. I don't know. Adam, actually, do you agree with that or not? Do you think the story-based shooter RPG thing is still viable in this day and age?
Of course.
Okay.
Like when it comes to open world narrative games, like Mass Effect or Starfield or Fallout, right? Like I just see shooting versus action as like, okay, what's your core? Which audience are we going to aim for? But ultimately, people just want really high agency, really interesting worlds to explore and narrative branches to go after, right?
I agree. No doubt. So let's hope the Mass Effect game is great. And
but
we'll
with
keep
this one
BioWare
too,
alive.
like they shrunk quite a bit. Like there was a big hit on layoffs, and then they also shrunk quite a bit of moving people around EA. So I think my big question here is like, how much real BioWare DNA is left in the studio to go after Mass Effect? And if they're shrinking down this much, how long will it take for them to go after Mass Effect? Because I think like the one mistake they made with Dragon Age Veilguard was originally it was meant to be a live service. It took them a long time to pivot back to where they got to. And I don't think Veilguard hit their marks whatsoever, right?
No. It was,
So that whole diversion into live service for Dragon Age just really hurt the franchise. With Mass Effect, hopefully they can go to a much more focused production and figure this thing out. But I think for this game, They've got to avoid going to a massive open world. Like, remember Mass Effect 1, like literally running around empty planets. They've got to figure out how to go to a really nice focused product that really has high narrative agency. That's the only way out of this to make this viable.
I am hopeful. All right. Multiverse has shut down this time for good, according to the headline. So it shut down once before and relaunched. Now it's shutting down for good. Another live service kind of bites the dust. But I mean, it had its moment in the sun, right? The launch was pretty impressive, but it just could not keep an audience.
I'll port over to my co-host of the Game Economist cast, who also works at Sick at Dinner, Eric Guan, who wrote, I think, in a great piece called The Many Mistakes of Multiversus, just like taking this game to absolute town. And it'll be interesting to see how you relate this, I think, really to Riot's live service fighter, which, I don't know, one of these days we'll learn more. But he points out that like 2v2 fighters are not as popular. If you look at most tournaments, it's 1v1. There's way too much going on screen when it's 2v2. So it becomes a game that's hard to really master. He also does a really great job, I think, of going after the myth that platform fighters are accessible. You know, with platform fighters, you can go in multi directions versus a 2D fighter, which you're only going back and forth. And yes, you can kind of do some jumping. And this is also one of the few game genres where you can kill yourself. And if you've ever played Super Smash Brothers, you can walk off the map. Not only that, when you're talking about any sort of fighter, it's a lot of actions per minute. And I think the last thing he talks about, which I really agree with, is that games in this genre are made by masters who have like refined their craft over many, many decades. I mean, you look at Super Smash Brothers, that guy's been cranking for decades. And even when you look at some of the long running fighters like Tekken or Street Fighter, these are masters of their craft. And I'm not sure WB Games had that going into a project like this.
I worked on Mortal Kombat, as you can tell from my background. I also fought to get Multiversus greenlit in the first place, right? So like I put my neck out there when we were talking with this studio and put together a business case. And when it came to like WB strategy at the time, we were looking for ways of what's the right first step into free to play. And my answer was like, I don't think you go after massive shooters. I think you can go after lower size markets like the fighting space where we actually have leverage with our IP. That was the initial assumption. Obviously, I was incorrect, but like I'm just saying that was the original thought. So the points that would go by with this like 2v2 fighters, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, those tournaments, that is a very niche market. And to basically say like, hey, 1v1 is the cap on fighting, it basically says that fighting will always be that size. Versus the thought with 2v2 is to say like, hey, like MOBAs, like shooters, instead of it always being me against the other person and I will die, I will lose if I mess up, is you have a squad, you have a team. Now all of a sudden lower skill players paired up with higher skill players can still win in those environments. 2v2, I think even would say like that's not enough of a move. And I think the camera problem is a solvable problem. It's not like you have to have a camera zoom out and see everything on screen in a Smash Bros environment. And I guess from my perspective, like more directions than 2D and having lots of actions per minute. Like when we're talking about the PvP space being high mastery, high skill spaces, like we're saying that MOBAs are dead because you can die in them, that you need a lot of actions in a MOBA. So MOBAs are dead. Like these are high skill games. Yeah, you're going to be able to kill yourself. Yeah, you're going to be able to do stupid things.
I think you're making a couple arguments in contradiction. So I think one thing to start with, I'd be interested in is how did you think about PlayStation All-Stars when you're putting together Multiversus thesis? What do you take away from that game?
It was a warning case. Obviously, it was a warning case. For any time that you're talking about a new game strategy and going after a market, there's going to be examples of success and there's going to be examples of failure. And the more failures that stack up, that doesn't necessarily mean like, okay, we can never go after this market. Like tons of people went after Coin Master. Obviously, Monopoly Go is a success, right? You just have to be able to learn from that pile and say like, hey, this is what we think they continually got wrong versus here's the master in the genre and this is what they keep getting right. Like one dead body in a room doesn't mean that you don't go after it.
No, I think that's totally fair. So then what do you see as the Multiversus thesis then? On one hand, MOBAs have all these actions as we were talking about, which does make them inaccessible, which gives a high barrier to entry, which is why it's been, a very defined genre. Racing is another example that's been a very defined genre. Fighting falls right into that category, being a very defined genre, just as you mentioned.
But you're still saying like as a defined low cap genre, but like you look at the top of Twitch, you look at the top of Steam, like these are fucking massive player bases.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I'm not talking about racing, but I am talking about mobile. I am talking about shooters. I am talking about like tax shooters,
but
which
not,
are
but
some
not really
of the more high
fighters
skill.
though.
No,
Fighters don't
totally.
really reach a really high TAM.
And keep in mind, from my perspective, the vision for this was never to say this thing is going to surpass those games, but it can be a niche that we operate and own. Same thing as with Mortal Kombat, where Mortal Kombat is not a mass market game, but it is a niche, and that niche continues to be successful.
Do we know anything about Brawlhalla? I feel like that's a game that's kind of been like, that always gets shuffled to the background. What is it? Ubisoft. It is a platform fighter. It's been around for a long time. It's had a mobile SKU. It's like never really blown up, but it feels like it's one of the few platform live service fighters we can point to as successful, right?
Exactly. It's just very small scale. Eric is already in mice nuts mode.
Yeah. I mean, we're getting more and more niche as we go here. Let's move on. Let's move on. So Midnight Society shuts down. Dr. Disrespects, Web3, circle jerk, basically. So
Extraction shooter too. Don't forget about that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Another extraction shooter there, Mr. Adam.
Why am I getting blamed with extraction shooters?
I don't know. You're like,
why am I?
No, I'm not surprised that this thing is getting shut down. On the more positive news, our friends at Laton Ventures have raised $50 million to invest in the global gaming market. They raised it from 35 to 50 million. They led their big investment has obviously been in Dream, which did a 30 million Series A recently. And we're going to talk about what's going on at Dream a little bit later in the podcast. They also have a second company that's done a round as well. They've made 5 investments so far. 3 of the companies are founders in Turkey. Very happy for their success. I do still think that early stage mobile investing is still a viable thing, even though most of the bigger funds have kind of abandoned mobile and they're now chasing AI. Gorkum works his fucking ass off, creating, I think, value for his investors. The only person that's really suffering in this equation is likely his lovely wife, but keep cranking, Gorkum. Pretty impressive what you've accomplished so far. So the next thing is Dream Games, which obviously is related to this. They are seeking $2.5 billion in debt and equity to double their valuation. So basically they say that this funding is to buy out existing investors and to set the valuation at $5 billion. Goldman Sachs is leading this round to secure, I think it's $1.25 billion from private lenders, and another $1.25 billion from investors, exchanged for ownership of the company. And somehow the 5 co-founders will retain 70% of the company after this round, with the rest going to a new equity partner. So there's a little bit of obscuring what's actually happening here, but I don't know. I'm just going to speculate here. Not sure I actually agree with this move. And I've talked about this before. Setting valuations so high is dangerous, right? So I think kind of this is the perfect time to actually sell the company and cash out, or just keep the company private and independent and raise shareholder value by continuing to crush it. Because creating like a $5 billion private mobile game company doesn't necessarily seem very wise in this current market, because it basically creates a company that's much harder to sell at that level. And going public as a publicly traded mobile game company with 2 games, I think that creates kind of maybe a tougher spot for the company longer term. Or maybe they just want to keep it as a cash cow, kind of some of the other bigger companies. I don't know. But it doesn't make sense from a liquidity perspective, in my view, anyway. However, it is early days for Royal Kingdom, and so far it is growing the company. Early numbers seem to show that it is all incremental growth. It is not cannibalizing Royal Match, as other companies have done in the past. But we need to keep an eye on it. It's relatively early, but we'll keep looking at it. But again, the theme this year, I think, is intellectual honesty. So, Goldman Sachs, has an incentive to do these type of deals because they basically make money and fees based upon the dollars that they raise, which is not necessarily the best interest for the company or its shareholders or its founders for that matter. So my assumption here is they can't possibly need the cash. I mean, they're fucking minting money right now, which actually seems to be indicated by what they're saying is the stated use of the funds. But I'm happy to discuss this with anyone, how this deal makes sense for the company, besides getting a huge valuation on paper. But I think the $5 billion valuation kind of limits their longer term opportunities and options for acquisition. I don't think that, again, the public markets are interested in mobile game companies, but that's kind of my view. I'd love to hear anybody else that thinks this is a good idea. But nonetheless, regardless of that, Dream is still killing it, shedding in all kinds of cash. Like, they're killing it.
So I think one of the things that you pointed out is that there hasn't been cannibalization. And when we look at downloads and we both look at category rankings over the long haul and over the short haul for Royal Match and the early returns for Royal Kingdom, like, you're spot on. I'm actually shocked that we haven't seen more differences in these trends. And I'd be curious to understand how they're thinking about UA. It's actually something I asked the 2.5 Gamer guys, and I'd love to hear Jem's point of view on as well. Is like, when you have a user come through the funnel, you want to allocate them to their highest valued use. And so how do you integrate that into a strategy that has two games? Do you really separate the teams? Do you try to do something more unified? Because, even if there isn't cannibalization on the charts, it could be the case that you could be sending a user to Royal Kingdom where they would have had a higher LTV in Royal Match. Like, this is, I would argue, a lot of the theory of portfolio transferring and having ads in other games is trying to connect them to their highest valued game. But the fact there hasn't been any cannibalization is like just pretty amazing, right? I mean, to put another game in their portfolio that could generate, in excess of $1 billion. I mean, one of the things we talk about in terms of Royal Match is that it didn't start off as like a juggernaut, right? It took a long time for them to cement their rankings on the app stores and ultimately pump a bunch of UA to always hang around the top 10. And we'll see if they do that for Royal Kingdom. Like, it's been a slow start, but the fact there's no cannibalization, I think, is really encouraging for them. The other thing that I was confused by, Eric, is that they hold 70% of the equity after this raise. What the fuck? Is this one of like the best founding team heists of all time to own 70% of a company at a $5 billion valuation?
Yeah, I mean, that is insane. And that's part of the reason I bet they did half debt, right? That could be serviced by the cash flows, right? So to keep that equity as high as possible for the founders. Yeah.
I don't know what else they have left to achieve.
I know. That's why selling it out makes sense. If I were them, I would have just sold, like, at this type of valuation. Like, it makes total sense. There are companies out there that are interested in these kind of cash flows and this kind of revenue. It's like, I don't think it would have been hard to find a buyer at this level. But getting a buyer above the 5 billion mark with any type of like premium, like 7 to 10 billion, like, I think that's a tough sell out there. But bird in the hand type thing. So, I mean, that's just kind of my assessment of it. And historically, we've seen that happen before with like the Machine Zone guys and like others that kind of waited too long. And anyway, I mean, they're still killing it. And, and maybe they treat it more like a piggy bank, like they just basically take all the 70% of the cash flows of this business, dude. That's all the money you could possibly need, right? You don't need more than that, right? So, like, I don't know. At this level, like, it's really about the personalities of the people at top in terms of what they want to do. So I'm sure I'll get some feedback from some of the investors. We'll see. All right, moving on.
There has been one of the biggest, or I think it is the biggest acquisition in at least Roblox developer history. Volodex, who we've been covering, I think for the past couple of months, they've been rolling up a bunch of Roblox experiences. I think they had a sports one, a football one they recently bought. They've been kind of like buying out top categories. And they made their biggest acquisition yet, which is Brookhaven. It's the most visited game on Roblox. It has about 120 million monthly MAU in Brookhaven alone. We don't know the acquisition price, so it'll be interesting to to speculate on that. But it looks like there is a market for Roblox M&A developers. Eric, what do you make of this?
Well, actually, what's crazy is I've been talking to some guys at Voldex for like years now. That's one of my kind of channel checks for mobile. I mean, for Roblox, generally speaking. And their strategy historically has been kind of like a consolidator of Roblox studios, smaller studios. And their goal basically is to bring them into the fold and help them kind of give them key learnings on monetization, live ops, et cetera, building their empire. And so with like these unsophisticated like kids that are developing games need that kind of support type thing. But this one, I don't know much about the game, but it seems like this is like a pure MAU buy, right? Like maybe for an advertising push, or maybe they think they can actually improve monetization and monetize their audiences better than they could. Unclear.
But that's basically what they showed in that slide, right? Is that based on like an ARPDAO basis, They're saying that right now the ARPDAU of Brookhaven is very, very low on a percentile basis.
Right.
And they can bring it up to more what their averages are and go from 18 to 36. And that's net from platform fees from Roblox.
That sounds so unexciting, Adam.
I
when
know,
you delivered
but
that
like-
monotone, 18 to 36 million, really? Wow. Knocked my socks off. Like that's just bad. I mean, I wouldn't say it's bad. I mean, if you're a roll-up company, I think it's fine. But I mean, this feels like an exemplary case of the limitations of Roblox.
Well, that's basically it, right? Like, this is the top game on Roblox. You look at the CCU, right? You're looking at 650K CCU in this game. Like, that's bigger than Counter-Strike is playing this game, right? And that's the run rate, net fees. Yep.
Oof.
That is
Less
it.
than a penny art now. I worked into the math. 120, 140 MAU. You know, you think maybe 500,000 or 50,000 a day, 360,000 a month. That's about a penny.
Which, to Matthew Ball's credit, in his deck, he did show that in terms of the per user revenue numbers. Yeah, you got
You mean this slide? This slide right here?
Wow. Just like
Wow,
right there.
that was amazing.
Wow, nice.
Do what I can. I think, to your point, Adam, I think this demonstrates potentially that Roblox is value destructive. So I published a piece earlier this week where I think Matthew Ball's biggest miss on the growth drivers is the idea that younger cohorts who are entering gaming are entering at much stronger engagement shares. So when you look at the amount of time people are spending when they're, let's say, 5 to 12 on games, generation over generation, it's way up, right? I think that's an intuitive thing we all agree on. And so if you think those trends are going to maintain, that means we're going to stack increasingly engaged users over time that are interested in gaming, and our global MAU will increase. Like, that would be a good long run trend. But if they stick to the Roblox platform and they don't grow out of it, or their spending habits don't change despite the engagement staying constant, then Roblox looks like an extremely value destructive proposition on gaming, like much worse than Game Pass, because no one used Game Pass, but everyone would use Roblox.
Yeah, so you're just saying, like, all of these players, as they age out, if they prefer to go to Roblox instead of buying games on Steam, they're going to be value destructive for the gaming environment. Which, to be honest, like, I'm even thinking the flip side here. Like, if I was some of these developers, right, like 18 to 36 million run rate of this thing, I would just go build a game on Steam and get significantly fewer users, but I could get 18 to 36 million annual run rate off of a little Roblox game like Liar's Bar or Content Warning type of game on Steam. It's just a far fewer players, but there's a business there.
I just want to say one thing about this deal. The fact that they didn't announce the actual value of the deal always gives me fucking pause, right? Like it generally means it's overvalued or no value. One of the two, right? It's like, it's always a red flag for me. It does leave some doubts in my mind about what's actually going on here, but whatever. That was their choice. The second thing is, like, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to argue the opposite point and defend Roblox, right? Because
Let's see it.
look, at the end of the day, my thinking of Roblox changed like last September a little bit with some kind of information about what's happening internally with the company and I've mentioned it in the podcast before, but maybe not as much as I have with my own clients that actually pay me money. But like the new leadership with Manuel as like chief product officer, he's become like more like kind of the acting operating CEO. And Dave, the kind of the visionary guy, is kind of taking a back seat from a chairman role. I mean, this is the kind of understanding that I have. This is not actually probably 100% accurate, but for all intents and purposes, what seems to be happening is that they're actually trying to monetize the audiences better than they have in the past, right? So they introduced advertising, obviously huge change in philosophy for them to add advertising to the platform, right? That was a big one. The UGC limits, or whatever the fuck they call that thing, where people can actually sell low quantity items. That was a huge kind of change.
Web3. Sorry, go ahead.
And then the purchase bonuses, doing transactions off platform, et cetera. So among other things, like they're basically trying to find the low hanging fruit to improve that monetization number that you're talking about, right? Like to get out of that low monetization. And you can actually see it in the data since then, is that like they are monetizing the tier 1 English countries better, like recently, right? And so Anyway, I got incrementally a little bit more positive last September on this point, and it seems like that there is some more potential to monetize that audience. Having said that, they are still growing.
Here's the real Eric.
Yeah. They're becoming more profitable, but not profitable, if that makes sense, right? So they're still not profitable with like stock-based comp, and as they improve like monetization on their tier 1 countries. And to put things in perspective with Roblox in general is that they are still trading at the level of their IPO price from 2021, right? Like it has been a fucking roller coaster, right? And they're basically 50% lower than where they were at their peak during the heyday of the metaverse from Mr. Matthew Ball, right? But in the short term, it does look like they have the momentum going in terms of improving some of these metrics. And the quarter looks like it's going to be solid. And it looks like going forward, they're going to be in decent shape to maintain these levels of growth. The same concerns I have about expanding the demo and all this other stuff still exist. But, right now the momentum is on their side, I would say. All right.
Okay.
Next story. Battlefield is back. EA did this, I would say, really strange kind of announcement on Battlefield, like providing like 10 seconds of gameplay or something like that. And then asking the customer to join their Battlefield labs as emissaries for the fucking game or something like that. And then they put it behind this bullshit wall where it takes like an hour to get in, to log in or to register to be perhaps a part of this. So it seems completely contrived and ridiculous in my view, because there's like an hour and a half wait in order just to sign up.
That was like a Cloudflare thing, right? Like so many people were trying to log into the website at the same time that they actually had to queue up. Yeah.
That's crap. Okay, that's fucking crap. Because first of all, there's not that much demand. Second of all, like I think it was completely created bullshit. Right?
It's no. It's Origin Tech backend. You don't know yet. Rest in peace.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Origin. Yeah, okay. Anyway, they are introducing a new brand called Battlefield Studios, representing the 4 studios that work on the series. So this was their big coming out moment, right? DICE, EA Motive, Criterion, and Ripple Effect. Look, I think Battlefield is an amazing franchise. I've been a huge fan for a long, long time, but I'm really actually torn on this product. Like these are one of the products that kind of confuses me because Battlefield is beloved. There is a customer out there that absolutely loves Battlefield. And I almost am 100% certain the quality is going to be really, really high this time around because they learn from the fucking disaster that was 2042, right? Where they launched this game and it was fucking broken, like absolutely broken. They spent years fixing it. And now the game is actually quite good. So they know what success looks like in this space, I would say, I guess. But the question for me really is, did the customer even want a Battlefield anymore? Like, are they actually looking for something new in shooters? It seems to me no, sadly, but I could be wrong on this one because at the end of the day, like the type of shooters that people play, they seem to be satisfied, right? Tactical, like you have Counter-Strike and Rainbow Six. Military, realistic, you have Call of Duty, which is just an insane juggernaut, right? Hero shooters, Team Fortress, Overwatch, sort of. And now the Marvel game, right? Like the Marvel game is killing it out there. Battle Royale, Fortnite, Warzone, Apex, not so much anymore. PUBG. And then obviously for sci-fi, you have Destiny and Halo. Well, not anymore with Halo because Microsoft just fucking destroyed that thing. So I don't know. Is there room for Battlefield in this equation? Again, it feels like the switching costs, particularly from Call of Duty, is much too high, right? And Call of Duty does what Battlefield does better in some ways, like the open world Warzone type of experience. But I think they have a tough road ahead, but I think they're prepared with a really high quality product. The question is whether or not the customer even gives a shit anymore. But what do you think, Adam? You're the expert.
So you're saying that based on those lanes, what they should have done is aim for the sci-fi lane?
Yeah, that's right. Destroy Destiny.
Yeah. There you go.
Actually, that's actually really funny. I didn't even think about that. That's actually probably the most open lane out of them all, right? Because Destiny's kind of a shit show and Halo has just been destroyed.
It just depends on like how big of a size that is. Like I think they are very much going into that military realistic lane, right? Which they've been able to operate alongside Call of Duty for a long time. And I guess like if you asked me this in October and November of this year, I would fully agree with you. What's making me scratch the back of my head here is like what made room for Marvel Rivals to succeed? Because we're saying the same thing, right? It's like hero shooters completely locked up. All this stuff completely locked up. You can't enter whatsoever. And then there was room for Marvel Rivals. And actually IDG, I'll give them credit. They did a good report on where players came from for Marvel Rivals. And it was mostly dormant hero shooters. I think most people have this like tendency to assume that as soon as a competitive game will come out, that active players of another franchise will just like plummet and you'll see it day one. And it actually doesn't really happen like that. Yes, I think Overwatch has had a hit from Marvel Rivals, but at the same time, you're seeing that there's this huge audience of dormant shooter fans that are hungry for a new service, and they jumped into Marvel Rivals. And at least like from the way that I've been seeing, like COD, Apex, Valorant, Overwatch are all down year over year.
Yeah.
And to my own squad of me playing shooters with friends, we're hungry for a new game because we didn't really attach to Marvel Rivals. By fall, we'll see, GTA 6, which will have PvP modes in it, and COD will be there. Can Battlefield fit in that window? Like, I'm going to squint and say, like, it's not out of the picture here, given where Apex, Valorant, Overwatch are right now. So if those things continue on their decline, I think there is room.
All right, let me crack my knuckles here about all the wrongisms that have been mentioned as a former DICE employee. So I guess first, Eric, I'll take you to town on 2042 being broken at launch and now being fixed. That is every single DICE game since Battlefield 3 have been launched in a shit state, awful fucking state, rushed out the door, tech problems, whatever it may be, whatever DICE problems there are, scramble to fix it 6 months later. Always been the DICE story. That is literally every single game. Point to one since Battlefield 3 that hasn't had that story. It's the same story over and over again. I think the losses have deepened the distrust in the franchise. I think it's also deepened distrust in Stockholm. And for people who aren't familiar, like DICE is what built the Swedish games industry. I think there was a report that something like 30 to 40% of the Swedish games industry is within like 10 square blocks of where DICE is here in Stockholm. So there's so much lineage and history and so much talent that DICE has helped to raise. It's always number one on the employers or the most desired list for new graduates. And it's not been on a good trajectory the last 20 years. I mean, we've been talking about Soderlund, who used to be the CEO of DICE. Remember, they got acquired by EA. He becomes the chief creative officer at EA. Remember, he's getting paid more than Andrew Wilson. He had that crazy package deal. He kind of fucked up BioWare a little bit, if we were referencing a story earlier. Remember, he was trying to get that jump right in Anthem, that super Iron Man jump. He was obsessed with that. He had his own floor in the DICE building. But he took a bunch of people with him to Embark Studios. He emptied out half the studio. And so that was one of the big talent losses. The second one was that TTK, which has announced a game within the last year, who I've worked with and I love to pieces, also emptied out, I would say, the last half of the senior leadership. So on one hand, you have a bunch of talent leaving the studio that's been around forever. I think the second thing is that you guys are also discounting how popular Battlefield is right now. Like if you go look at even Battlefield 1 or you look at Battlefield 5, we're still talking about 30 to 40,000 Steam PSU. That's pretty significant for games that aren't getting new content. And like Call of Duty, the Battlefield problem has always been that people are interested in these different theaters of war. How do we actually align them together? Because the game's audience is crusty Germans. And if you look at a lot of the other games that have had upticks, I think in Battlefield's relative weakness, it's games like Hell Let Loose. It's games like Squad. It's a lot of the military large-scale shooters on Steam. This audience has always been around, and I think occasionally we've been able to dip into more of the mainstream. If you remember, there was only 1 year that Battlefield beat Call of Duty. This is good trivia. Do you guys know what year that was? Which Call of Duty that was?
Battlefield 1.
Bad Company?
That's correct. Right, Adam?
Bad
Adam,
Company.
I'm going to send you some Swedish kroner. That was when
What did you say?
Call of Duty.
Battlefield 1.
It was Battlefield 1. The trailer did really well. And then if you remember, Call of Duty was the weakest this year. They had Advanced Warfare, which did not do very well. I think it's one of the lowest performing titles.
I was in sales. I could see these numbers. I know.
No shit. I guess that is true. So anyways, this is all really sad. It's really sad. Stockholm has basically lost leadership over this project. It's all over to Vince. Vince has got to bring this franchise around. All these studios which have tried to run away from Battlefield have been brought back in. Like Criterion has tried to run away from it. It's like, nope, you're a Battlefield studio. If you remember DICE LA, that's actually what Ripple Studios was. They were trying to do their own thing. I was involved in that for a little bit. They're ripped back to this. I don't really know if Vince gives a shit about Battlefield. I don't understand what Vince's motivations are anymore, Eric. I don't understand how to think about Vince as a person. Like, he got paid out from Respawn. It doesn't look like he's an active leader. I don't get what he cares about anymore. I would say just the last thing as I ramble on this, I think the other thing to point out is that Battlefield has always had a much lower headcount than Call of Duty. You know, we're talking about 3,000, 6,000 developers on crazy numbers on Call of Duty. Battlefield has never had the level of studio support that Call of Duty has had. And to be fair, it's never made as much revenue. But I think that's also one of the reasons why it doesn't quite measure up to those expectations people place on it, is it's never had the firepower on headcount that Call of Duty has had. Go Vince or go home.
I think they're going to get the quality here, right? I totally agree with Eric that they've learned from 2042. They're pulling together the resources. And I think Vince being there also really rallies the troops, gets a clear vision across, also helps manage up towards EA, having someone like Vince there to give the reputation boost. Because otherwise you end up in like a BioWare situation where the publisher doesn't trust you. They start pulling in people from different directions, and then you've got a very unfocused product. So like, I'm going to guess this is what's happening, but I think Vince there helps. But what I'm really taking from your points there, Philip, is that you are on all of these games and you're the reason.
Yeah, exactly. There's a common thread around this. It's like everything you touch turns to shit, wow, dude. That's what the common thread is.
Wow, I've learned something new together.
I got an expensive Battlefield SKU approved. It's 2042. Remember that $100, $20 SKU? Yeah, I'm trying my best. It's tough, man. It's a lot of scars on this one.
My last take on this, and again, I would love feedback from those that are closer to this, is that my understanding is that with Vince and Byron Bede from Call of Duty, they have pulled together the 4 different studios, and they are working extremely well together to create an equality experience. Like, this has been expressed to me by numerous people. I'm hoping for the best here, but I think the challenges that they've faced over the years is because of Soderlund and the brain drain that you're talking about. And don't forget that Soderlund was not innocent in what happened to DICE as a studio, right? He had an absolutely terrible reputation as studio head when he left EA, right? Disruptions in the development process, focusing on pet projects like fucking Mirror's Edge, which is like a focus group game of.
Whoa. Leave Mirror's Edge out of this, man.
Stop. I think I have my copy of Mirror's Edge behind me.
Stop. They, force feeding the Frostbite engine to every studio in the organization. Like, I mean, he wasn't a saint, right? But you're right. He did take a gajillion people away from that. So anyway, I think they've rebuilt it and they have the teams to create a quality product. Again, I still come down to whether or not the customer is really all that going to be that interested. And I'm hoping they will. So
one last piece I'd like to see someone write about, which is the story of Battlefield Portal, which I think was the solution to a lot of Battlefield problems that didn't pan out. If you remember, this is their UGC element that released in 2042, where you could play with multiple theaters in war. And it came out. It was an incredible piece of technology. It's still around. You can still download it, but it never really took off. And I guess I'm curious on people doing analysis on why they think that failed.
Well, number one, they spent all the time building that instead of getting the game right at launch.
No, that was shift off to Ripple. This was a Ripple limb. Stockholm wasn't doing this. Stockholm didn't make Portal.
I'll put on my skeptical eyes. Like, things like that can distract developers.
Was this part of the Metaverse fever dream, UGC type thing?
No, I think this was a direct response to a thesis that one of the prior GMs at DICE had been propagating for a long time, which is the same thing that happens at Call of Duty. Why the fuck are we building the same store over and over again every time we release this? Why are we building the same why are we building all the same things over and over again? Why can't we just have one stable piece of tech and then layer on new content on top of that? Which is kind of what Call of Duty executed on this year, right? They have a unified engine. It seems like they have unified UI. It's the same code base. I think that was always the dream. And I think Portal was one way to get it there. And it just didn't pan out. But something that, remember the web browser? Remember Uprise?
Yeah. There's Halo also 3? Did that too, right? Like Halo Forge. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Neither of them panned out.
This podcast is brought to you by AppsFlyer. In today's digital world, understanding your app's journey from discovery to download is more than just insightful, it's essential. Enter AppsFlyer, the leader in mobile attribution and marketing analytics that allows you to measure the full potential of your marketing efforts, making every ad dollar work smarter. With AppsFlyer, that's your new reality. Dive deep into data-driven insights that reveal exactly where your users come from and how they'll interact with your app. AppsFlyer, where your app's potential meets performance.
Step into the future of game monetization with Xsolla, the premier partner for game developers seeking to expand their reach and revenue. Xsolla provides a robust suite of tools designed to enhance user acquisition, manage subscriptions, and streamline payment solutions worldwide. Unlock new markets and maximize profitability through their customized, secure payment architecture and dedicated support team. Xsolla, powering game developers to achieve global success.
Next.
AI. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Oh
Here,
my God.
can't-
I wrote a piece this week. Man, it's been rare I've been able to share a piece I wrote this week. I wrote a piece this week called AI in Gaming Has Flopped. And what I argue in the piece is that we have been at the subsidization stage of AI for gaming. I mean, we basically have kept NVIDIA alive for as long as it has been by gamers basically just buying video cards and creating demand for 3D graphics. And a lot of what AI has unlocked is because we've subsidized this company for decades after decades. And yet we haven't been able, I would argue, to be on the frontier of this technology. I would argue that the basic implementation of AI in gaming right now, at least from a front end consumer perspective, is chatbots and press releases from Cosmic Lounge on match 3 levels that we still haven't seen get delivered yet. And it gets even worse when you think about like how much AI progress has been made and yet hasn't been made in gaming. And then you compare that to Web3. Like Web3 seems to have made more progress in gaming than AI has. And when you think about gaming historically, and when you talk to VCs specifically about Web3, one of the things that VCs will instantly tell you is that gaming is the first and best use case and helps drive mass customer adoption. They love to tell you that fact. And yet we haven't seen that be the case in AI, which I think is also very troubling. We used to be at the frontier, a lot of these technologies.
Whoa. We didn't say that in Web3, though.
That we were the first
mass
best,
adoption
use case.
From the mass adoption from gaming?
Come
on.
I will leave that to the VCs in the comments sections to debate with you about. I think maybe yes and no. I mean, when you look at like the total value of tokens, how much of that is gaming tokens? When you look at wallets from Immutable versus wallets from other third party, I don't know. I think you could make the case that gaming actually has driven a lot of Web3 adoption.
I just made this argument like a few days ago. I agree that gaming makes sense as a Web3 tool for Web3 adoption, but that didn't create mass market adoption, right? It didn't
Correct.
accelerate adoption, but it's not creating some kind of mass market thing unless you're talking about the population of the Philippines and Southeast Asia. Yeah, then maybe we could talk about mass adoption.
We've done things on, I would argue, the supply side too, in terms of physics, haptic feedback. We've also taken wrong directions, but we've been at the forefront, right? We're at the forefront of cloud, I would argue, with a lot of the early streaming attempts. And I'm not talking about Stadia. I'm talking about OnLive. Remember OnLive? You know, rest in peace. But we're at the forefront of that innovation. We think about motion controls. You know, before the iPhone had gyroscope, we were fucking with motion controls for a long time, going back to the SNES. Subscriptions, you know, we're pretty early on in terms of consumer subscriptions. So even though we've been involved in failed bets, we've at least been on the frontier. And I think when you look at like the Cosmic Lounge case, I think that shows where there's a lot of limits in AI, at least from the supply side, which is that even if you make more levels and you make more content, that content is still part of an experience, and experience is driven by a designer. And so we basically have moved the problems in the supply chain down the funnel. So now we have a bunch of match 3 levels, but you need to hire more designers and you need to lay them out intelligently. Like you need to create an experience. And I think AI will eventually get to that point. But again, it hasn't happened. You know, we still are not at the forefront of this technology. And I'm surprised we haven't seen it more on the supply side, or we haven't seen it more on the consumer front facing side too. And I guess my message to the game industry would be like, let's get out there and ship fast and make sure that we're embarrassed by our first prototype. But it has to be more than just like AI chatbots if we're going to be at the forefront of AI. And I'm disappointed we haven't seen that be the case yet.
So you're saying like what is it, Love Girl? The weird 4X thing that you chat with an AI. That's not a messy prototype?
I think what that is very similar to what Eric Seifert had mentioned when he went over user acquisition AI milestones. And he goes through different milestones of how AI will be integrated and AI basically moving up the supply chain. I think that Top Girl game you mentioned is a part of his milestone framework, but I don't consider that a unique gaming implementation. I consider that a user acquisition strategy with AI, which is where the innovation has been to this point, has been Gen AI and ads.
Yep. And to your one point of Web3 making more progress in 26 months versus AI, What data points are you looking
in
at?
gaming? In gaming, it's just a claim around. We have so much capital that's floating around in Web3. They seem to be making more public shipments, more noise, more activity, more product in consumers' hands than I've seen from AI in gaming.
They raised in a frothy market. They've got a ton of that capital locked in. They're locked into Web3. So they've got to be vocal. They've got to be trying to do something. And AI has been exploding during a not so frothy market. Is that what's driving part of that? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of like what that 26-month really looks like.
I think that's totally fair, Adam. I think that if we thought AI was going to drive all this growth, I would expect the graph we're looking at right now, which is from Convoy Ventures, I would expect there to be an acceleration in gaming VC, right? And right now we're looking at nominal amounts for 2024. It's at some of its lowest amounts ever when it comes to venture capital raised for gaming.
Does this include B2B gaming, or is it all just gaming consumer service?
They do, in the Convoy report, they do talk about platforms. I can ask Jason over there if it is included in this specific chart. I would bet for now it is included since they mention it later in the report.
Because like the one thing I'm thinking is what's pulling it down is obviously the status of the market. The other thing is I think AI right now is mostly impacting B2B, right? Like platforms and engines and tools.
I agree.
Right?
I completely agree.
So I would want to make sure that that's covered in this. And then because from my perspective, like if we're talking about the last 26 months, AI has made significantly more developments in the last 26 months versus Web3 companies. But that's from my perspective. Like I'd love to look at data to suggest one way or the other. But like there's that funnel, right? Of, okay, so at the beginning, you just have concept art, right? Like little things you can write documents better. You can do concept art. Then you've got marketing assets.
Call of Duty key art with 4 fingers or 5 fingers, whatever it was.
Then you have marketing assets, right? That are player facing, that are driving up. Like that is absolutely happening now. And then you're getting into the actual art production. And then you're getting into true AI first games. And yes, as you go down that funnel, that percentage goes down pretty quickly, right? But those are the different use cases. And that's how companies are going to be slowly moving between this funnel. And the speed at which AI growth has been happening is pretty astronomical. So maybe we're just not seeing it in these metrics, but at least from where I'm standing, like anecdotally, from like keeping my ear to the ground and talking with other companies that are doing this, like a lot of this stuff is happening under the hood of game companies.
Where have we seen this from a consumer facing or supply side perspective that we can point to? Because I get people are going into ChatGPT and pasting, code to have it being corrected, but where's the supply side or the consumer? Like, we're talking this beforehand.
And I'm saying,
why am I not seeing Apex Legends double characters or double cosmetics? Where are the games doing that are seeing these massive supply side increases? Like we were talking about this generative voices.
It's not doing that yet. It's not at the consumer facing side.
Yeah,
but I'm saying in the funnel steps before, it's growing pretty quickly, that you will eventually see that, but you're not going to see that yet.
But this is my disappointment, though, is that we used to be at the forefront of this stuff. Now we're just being dragged along by everyone else. We're at the receiving end. Now we're not at the front lines advancing this. Like we love to pride ourselves at being where art meets science. And yet this is the best we can do is like key art and text bots, chat bots, like another Nintendogs with AI in it. Like I would love to see game designers go ham on this. Like where are the game designers sitting down and be like, how can I make a whole game around this? And I know there are people that are taking like, let's for instance say like, being a GM and in Dungeons and Dragons. But I mean, like where are the real art meets science use cases of AI in games? This is what's disappointed me the most is we used to be at the forefront of this shit. And we're not anymore. And don't get me wrong, AI is going to do all the things that you mentioned, Adam. I agree. It's going to work its way through the funnel, but we're not special when it comes to AI. And we used to be special.
And supposedly we're going to be setting up some kind of debate at GDC about this. So we'll hopefully have a chance to discuss it. All right. We're going to hold this down to less than an hour. Well, until next week, hopefully we'll have Jen back to manage this nonsense. Have a good week, guys.
You did it. You made it to the end of the episode. As a fan of the show, it would help us out if you'd subscribe and leave us a review on the podcast service of your choice. Those stars and likes, while a small action on your part, mean a lot to us and help to grow the show. More importantly, are you a member of the Deconstructor of Fun Slack group? If you have 5 years or more of games industry experience, go to deconstructoroffun.com/Slack and apply to join. Join the games industry best professional community filled with peers always willing to lend a hand, or subscribe to our newsletter to get all the latest insights from the Deconstructor of Fun content creators. Thanks for listening.